Hello, and welcome to Gardener's World, and an hour of inspiration to kickstart the new gardening year.
Come on. Go.
It doesn't matter if you're limited by space or money. Gardening is a pleasure that can be shared by anyone, anywhere. And today we'll be looking back through the archives, exploring ways to unlock the potential of whatever kind of space you've got, with creative planting ideas and practical tips that won't break the bank. Coming up on today's programme, Carol shows us how we can all grow wonderful plants for free.
People talk about folk having green fingers. Well, I don't believe that. I think everybody's got green fingers. I think everybody can propagate plants.
We meet a gardener whose regular trips to the recycling centre have helped her create a garden that's full of secret corners.
Lots of things here from the tip, table from the tip, flower pot from the tip. Recycling is not obsession, it is a lifestyle.
And Rekha proves that anyone can grow vegetables with great ideas for crops in pots.
You can grow any vegetable in pots, but you must consider the root size. So something like carrots will need long pots. Something like lettuce can grow in a very small pot.
Sowing, growing and sharing produce from the garden is one of life's great pleasures, and it doesn't have to cost the earth, and there are many ways to reap big rewards for little cost. Throughout last year, Carol shared some of her tips on how to do exactly that.
One of the pleasures of gardening for me is growing your own plants. I've been doing it for as long as I can remember. This garden is just stacked with plants, and almost all of them I've grown myself, from seeds, from division, from cuttings. And just occasionally I've actually invested in a couple of packets of seed of something really, really special. But the great thing is, when they grow on and flower and set their own seed, I can collect that too. Seed is just such a miraculous thing, isn't it? And all we're doing when we sow our seed is emulating nature, really. Now, this was a wreath that I made for Christmas. It didn't look quite like this then. We had all sorts of things in here, but one of the most spectacular things we had were these eryngiums. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous perennial, this. It's lovely in foliage, it's beautiful in flower. It's Eryngium bourgatii, it's a sea holly, and I'm hoping we can get a load of seed from it. Look at all that seed! Isn't that exciting? You know it's going to happen, you hope it's going to happen, but when it happens, it's just splendid. Oh, just to feel the sunshine on your face, you just feel as though everything's alive and everything's started. The joys of spring. Well, that method of surface sowing and then sprinkling with grit is great for almost all seeds. But if you're dealing with big seeds, then you can do something called station sowing. So the idea is that each seed gets its own individual compartment. And the great advantage of that is that when you come to move those plants on, instead of having to lever them out of the seed tray, you can just push them out and plant the whole thing out, which means there's no root disturbance. So this is an ideal method for really big seed, like sweet peas, chard. Now, I've had these module trays for 40 years or so, and every single year I've sown into them. So although they're plastic, they really have been recycled over and over again. But why not do this if you just want a few plants? or get a load of them if you want lots and lots of sweet peas, because that's what I'm going to sow. That is just bits of cardboard stuck in here, and it will keep those individual plants quite separate until the time they're planted out. All you do is put your seed on the top and then just push it in. So it's maybe a centimetre or so under the surface there. And it's got all the makings of a new plant. There you are, you're all tucked in. Come on, Fief, come on. Just over 6 weeks ago, I sowed my first lot of seeds. Well, just look at these. I wanted to show you the progress. These were the sweet peas, sowed in a homemade modular tray, just to pun it with cardboard. And not only have they made little short, really sturdy shoots, but look at this. You can actually see the roots. Well, I'm pleased with those sweet peas, but I'm thrilled to bits with this. These are cosmos. Aren't they great? They're really strong, really sturdy. But if I leave them in here for any length of time, then they'll start to get etiolated, which just means they'll grow up all skinny. So I've got to move them on now, which means moving each one into a separate little container of its own. And they've got twin leaves. You call them cotyledon leaves, but people often call them seed leaves. And all seedlings do this. When you're picking up your seedlings, never ever pick them up by the stem, by the true leaf that's at the top, or any other bit. Just use these lovely seed leaves, because they are dispensable, so even if you break them, it won't harm the plant. Going down, and just lowering this into this hole. Then I use the other end of the chopstick just to push that down and firm it in. Another unexpected way of actually making more plants for free, leaf cuttings. Now, it's very often used with house plants. Fewer and fewer people have got their own gardens, and this is a way of bringing the outside inside. I want to start with this glorious begonia. This is a form of Begonia rex. This one's called Dark Eyes. What I'm after, what I want to select, is a leaf that's full grown, it's properly mature, but it's still fresh and young, like that. It's really important where you cut. All plants have the ability to change one kind of cells into another. In this case, we're hoping that leaf cells are actually going to become root cells and capable of producing new leaves too, so a whole new plant. And the hormones that actually help that process are concentrated where the veins meet the leaf. So I want to expose lots and lots of those veins and plunge those into some compost. If I actually turn it over, it's much easier to see where these veins are, much more clearly visible. Now I'm going to turn my board right round, because I want to cut across this way now and make all these into squares. These cuttings have got to actually sit in the compost, but not too far. And I'm just going to make these little furrows. Now I'm working from the outside of the leaf, which means that the base of the cutting there, is going to be the closest to that central midrib, because that's where the greatest concentration of those hormones is going to be. So make sure you keep your leaf in the same place whilst you're doing this. Don't go and answer the telephone in the middle. All the plants that we're propagating from leaves are really sort of woodland plants. They all grow in shade, so it's vital that they don't go into direct sun. And keep them moist but not wet. So this is what you're aiming for. This is one, though, that's been done by basically the same method, but this time using a whole half a leaf, cut just below the midrib and pushed in, inserted into the compost. But I like doing these individual pieces because then when you come to separate them and pot them up, they're much more easy to move. But either way, it doesn't matter. Depends how much time you've got. And it only takes a few weeks, under ideal conditions. If you've got one of those propagators with a little top on it, then all the better, because it'll keep in that moisture. Isn't that just absolutely beautiful? It's a streptocarpus called polka dot purple. Now, my mum loved streptocarpus and she was always propagating them. She did it in such a straightforward way, just taking a leaf, cutting it up in sections, but there's an even easier way, and that is to take a whole leaf and just divide it in two, leaving the midrib in the middle. So you've got two equal slices and then just inserting them into the compost. Little plants will start to form. Once you feel they're big enough to handle and you've got several of them along there, you can take them out, detach them very carefully from the big leaf, which by that time will have started to fizzle out, and pot them on individually. People talk about folk having green fingers. Well, I don't believe that. I think everybody's got green fingers. I think everybody can propagate plants.
Good boy, come on. Out you come. There's a good boy. Well done. I love the way that Carol embraces the natural speed of growth. We're all trying to hurry and get things done so quickly, but if you can tune into that, it seems to me a real celebration of the rhythms of nature. This is a grass. It's called Anamanthele lesoniana, or pheasant grass. And it has a habit of seeding itself all over the place, usually where you don't want it and where it's not easy to move it. But by seeding itself in this trough, it means that I can move it very easily, and I've got somewhere where it will work perfectly. So, I will now rehome that. Now here at the front of the grass border, I've got a gap. So perfect for putting this grass. Now, I don't know if you can see, I've got two grasses there, 1 and 2. And I think the best thing to do would be to separate them and fill another gap. So if I just gently tease that apart, these are tough plants, so don't be too precious about them. With your thumbs, get in there and just tease them apart, trying to keep as much root as possible on both of them. There we go. It's as dry as a bone, but quite happy. And actually, that's one of the things about Anamanthele, is it used to be classified as part of the steeper family, and that gives you a clue of how it likes to grow. Really good drainage, doesn't mind being hot and dry, but hates sitting in too wet ground. They seed themselves very freely, so you've always got new plants, but don't expect the parent plant to live more than, well, 3 years is quite good. And they are not fully hardy. And although that doesn't fill the space now, It will. They grow quite big. That will easily fill that space and do the job without any trouble at all. So that's good. Now I've got the other one here, but I don't want to put that in the grass borders. So I'll go and pop this up in the orchard beds, along with some other plants. Come on, Ned. Come on. Good boy. Good boy. The truth is, it's not just the one empty gap I've got that I want to fill. If I go around the garden and I'm honest, it's full of gaps and spaces that appear at this time of year, partly as a result of earlier planting dying back, having done their things, whether they're bulbs or early perennials. And so the secret is to move plants around. Now, obviously, I've got this anamanthele, which will go in here. Let's take that out, which we don't want. I have to say that the combination of anamanthele that likes good drainage and lots of sunshine with hydrangea, which likes it to be damp and have some shade, is not an obvious one. You'll never see that in the textbooks, but it will work. This is a plant that will grow almost anywhere. So we'll pop that in here on the edge. There we go. I will, of course, have to water that and the other one I put in, but I've just got a couple more plants to put in first, and they're here. This is a geranium phaeum that I took from the cottage garden when we took out the hedges and the pear trees. I've had them in pots really ever since then, almost a year, and now this will be a good place for them. That will be fine underneath the tree because geranium phaeum is one of the few plants that really will be perfectly healthy and happy in dry shade. And I've got another one which will pop in there. And it's just filling the gap. It's really creating ground cover. And ground cover is not glamorous, but it's really useful because you have that understory from which then you can think about the colour and the forms and the shapes that you're going to build above it. Right, let's get them in the ground.
We're off to Southampton next to revisit a proudly thrifty gardener, Audrey Crutchfield, and her husband, Jonathan.
Audrey is, she's an incessant car booter and tip visitor. And when she goes to the tip, she will usually come back laden with stuff.
In the local tip, they have a shop and you can purchase things at reasonable prices. Tip, 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 tip. Tip, tip. Recycling is not obsession, it is a lifestyle. I have been banned by my family because I bring the odd things back that they do not understand until I've actually used them, and then everybody wants me to look out for something. Lots of things here from the tip, table from the tip, flower pot from the tip. Recycled bird cage without a bird. Not quite sure what the plant is. I believe it's a sedum.
It's not a canary plant, is it?
No. No canary in there. This isn't from the tip. I am now in one of the 19 rooms at the side of my garden, and this is where I take my jasmine cuttings. What is important to do is find one with the woody area and snip. Yep. Take off all these long ones and just cut just about there, and then I pop it into some compost and then I water that well. I learnt to do this by trial and error because I actually don't like just cutting things and throwing them away. All of this jasmine here is from a cutting, and there's lots of plants that you can actually do that with. So I would encourage anybody to try. These are my peaches, and I'm really proud of these. Early on the year, the leaves can get a disease, what I call peach blight. What I actually do is I go around every single leaf that is showing that. I pick them off one by one, and I always discard them in a bucket because I don't want that disease to spread, and I wash my hands. I am very proud of my peaches, and they taste really juicy. Look at that. Wish you could taste it. Every single day, rain, shine, snow, I will be out here just getting a piece of that medicine, getting that healing. I go in the garden every day. Sometimes I'll wake up really early, get a cup of tea, and I will just be out here. So if it's 6 o'clock, it's 6 o'clock, especially in the summer. If it's 5 o'clock, it's 5 o'clock. Sometimes I could be down here at 11 o'clock at night. Got lots of agapanthus, which I love dearly. I always collect the seeds, which are green at the time. I take them into the greenhouse, lay them on tissues. I have to let them dry out first, which takes a couple of weeks in the greenhouse. I then pot them on, lay them on top of some wet compost, and then cover them up with a lid. I don't put soil on top of them, and it takes about 18 months before they germinate. I really do love my garden. It's an absolute pleasure to me. And it still brings joy and tears to my eyes.
Well, I have to say that I think peaches, or indeed any fruit, picked fresh from the garden is one of the great luxuries in life. And you don't need a huge amount of space to grow them. Last spring, I planted some stepover pears to go with the stepover apples that I've already got. Stepovers are an excellent way to grow fruit in a small space.
Now, let's just be clear about what a stepover is. I've got a couple here. A stepover is made from a normal pear or apple tree with a shoot going up. And that shoot, which is called the leader, is bent down sideways. And the first branch is bent the other way. So you have a T shape. Now, the second thing that's really important with stepovers is that they are on a dwarf rootstock, this bit here. And the rootstock determines how the plant grows. Whether it's a great big tree, whether it's a dwarf, whether it's a bush, whether it grows well in wet soil or dry soil, there are lots of different rootstocks that are adapted to different conditions. The top, the grafted bit, determines the fruit. Now, before you plant, it is important to make sure that the ground is prepared. And what that really means when you're planting an apple or a pear is that there's reasonable drainage. And the other thing is you need some sort of support at the end of the run. And most stepovers will reach up to about 10 foot, and something that you can stretch across to tie them down to. Now, I like using hazel, but bamboo or wire will do the job just as well. Now, it's worth stressing you do need either two apples or two pears that flower at the same time. So the pollinating bees can go from one plant to the other. I have here Concord and Doyen de Comis. Concord is self-pollinating, but it does much better with another one. And Doyen de Comis needs a pollinator. So always get two plants, either the same or from adjacent groups. When you're planting, it needs to be in the middle. But with all trees, what you need is not a deep hole, but a wide hole. So I'm just going to dig that much wider than the pot. Test that for height. Now, at this point, what you need to observe is that the graft must be at least 2 inches above the surface of the ground, and that's really important. So I'll take this out. Now you can see those roots are fine. So that can go there like that. And it's always better when you're planting a tree or a shrub to plant it on a slightly raised mound rather than a saucer. The roots will go down and find the moisture, but if they're sitting in a puddle, then you're going to have problems. It's important to firm it in, so with the heel of your foot, just press down as you go around. Take these off, like that, and take this out. Now, having got your structure, however you want to make it, these need to be trained down. All plants want to grow vertically much more than they want to grow horizontally. So to encourage growth, you want to leave some of it untied until it reaches the length that you want. This is not going to bear any fruit for a year or two. But the stepover apples, they've been producing fruit for the last 10 years really well. They look good, and yet they fit into a small space.
Now, flower shows are always great places to pick up ideas. And at last year's RHS Hampton Court Palace Garden Festival, it was some space-saving crops that caught Rekha's eye.
I'm a firm believer that anyone can grow, no matter how big your budget, no matter how big your space. I'm on the lookout for some easy win plants that are low maintenance but do very well in pots. I really like this display. These are all container plants. They're house plants, but what I like about them is the containers. These are things you could find in a charity shop. We've got a biscuit tin full of succulents, you've got boxes, and you can even use an old casserole dish. You're actually creating a garden, but it's a mini garden. And then, of course, you have to think about what plants have gone in and make sure that they all love the same condition. These are all succulents, so they'll all do well. I really like this. We have got a really lovely arrangement of ferns. They like the shade, but they also like a bit of light. So the one addition thing you have to have is grow lights, because plants do need a bit of light. Plastic pots are a bit unsightly, so hessian or even any material would be really good just to make your container look pretty. Great idea. Here, we've got a really good display of vegetables. You can grow any vegetable in pots, but you must consider the root size. So something like carrots will need long pots. Something like lettuce can grow in a very small pot. And one lettuce per pot is perfect, because all you'll be doing is picking a few leaves at a time. I've really loved seeing everything here today. No matter how much money or space, there is something that will fit in that place. And that's what I like about using pots.
The RHS Flower Show Tatton Park has always been keen to demonstrate just what can be achieved in a limited space.
The long borders here at Tatton prove you do not need a lot of space to be creative. This border has got a really strong theme. It's all about upcycling. Imagine you go into an old garden and you see it's full of rubbish. What do? We tend to clear it away, throw it in a skip and dispose of it. Well, they're saying no. Put it to one side, have a sift through. Can you reuse it? And they do really well here. You've got the gabion walls that go through the centre of the space. They double up as seats, but they also divide the area, so you've got planting on both sides. They're full of old concrete, broken bricks, sand, and then they're planted. on top, things like sedums and thymes. And we come to the planting, got things like the pears, deal with those dry conditions. The agastache, that will bring in the pollinators. And things like the verbena there, that even if there is a really bad winter, they'll seed around and then regenerate. So I think all in all, this really does do what it says it wants to. I like this because this does exactly what it says on the tin, and in a very elegant way. If you look, those steel gabions, that's a representation of the Manchester skyline. But the next bit is that importance of green space, and I love the way that the planting sort of more or less engulfs these structures. And I think there's a really good idea here that we can all take home, and it's all about flower shapes. We all love colour, but when you go down the garden centre, see how many different shapes you can pick. Look, salvias, eryngiums, campanulas, achilleas, all those different shapes put together create all these different relationships and contrasts. And there ends up being just this sort of real elegance. I love it.
This border is all about pollinators. There's water and there's logs for habitat, but there's also a huge range of different plants, mostly in blues and yellows. So for the yellows, we have Achillea, there's Coreopsis, there's beautiful Ligularia flowers, which you don't often see, but they are quite covered in bees, but also blues. So we have Nepeta, there's Verbenas, there's the classic lavender, and all of these colours that are on the UV spectrum are easily seen by pollinators. There's also quite a lot of white flowers, and they'll be perfect for the nighttime pollinators, like the moths. This is a really lovely border, and it's representing a front garden, even complete with a willow woven door and a woven willow cap. What could be better? This garden has a small bit of paving which is completely permeable, so any rain that lands on it will drain away, and the rest of the garden is filled with plants. There's also water storage, which doubles up as a wildlife pond with the rocks piled up against it, and the whole thing is to inspire people to create green wildlife corridors in urban spaces.
Now, still to come on today's programme.
We visit the garden of the food writer Leyla Kazim. It may be small in size, but has a fascinating array of produce.
This is my sunny border, and I've got about 15 edibles growing in here. I just love that it's absolutely crammed, and there's something tasty growing in every single little patch of space.
And we join Nick at his new home as he transforms an empty plot into his vibrant and inspiring garden.
I finally bitten the bullet and bought my own place. Not a huge garden, but it's about average for the UK. I'm just so thrilled to finally be able to put down roots, literally and metaphorically.
Last March, I planted 4 stepover pears to go along with my stepover apples, and by mid-July, it was time to prune them.
If you've not done this before, it can feel very counterintuitive, because this is a good example. You have a really healthy, strong, vertical leader. Every tree wants to produce a leader that will grow vertically up, good and strong. And that's what you have to suppress, because all growth wants to be horizontal. So, the upright growth here, cut right back. Cut to about 4 leaves is a good rule. So I'm going to cut this to there and just take that off. And then this one here can come off. And then this one too, we take that off. This pruning is formative. In other words, you just do enough to lead it in the direction you want until it's established. But once it's established, you will have to prune every summer. And summer pruning has a very different role to winter pruning. There's a really good example here on these stepovers, because when you prune in summer, you restrict growth. When you prune in winter, you encourage growth. So simply take it all right back, and you can see the fruit in there growing. So I'm cutting in, just leaving little spurs. And the whole business of spurs is when you've got new growth like this, you can see it's clean and there's nothing growing on it. But once you start to get those knobbly side shoots, the spurs, that's what produces the fruit. So you can see the general outline that's appearing. We're still keeping a cover of leaves, but the fruit are much more visible, and that means that because they're more visible, they're more exposed to light and heat, which means that they will ripen quicker and perhaps better. So that helps. But also what's left behind is wood that can mature and develop spurs and therefore produce more fruit. We don't want to go right back down and remove that, otherwise we're going to have to wait a few years until that gets ready to fruit. And then in winter, what you do is remedial pruning. So anything that's damaged, is too weak or crossing or going in the wrong direction, then you take that out.
Back in the summer, we visited the food writer Leyla Kazim, who, despite having a small urban garden, uses it to best culinary advantage.
The amount of food I grow in this garden isn't a huge amount, but just the fact that I can grow some things that we can eat is an incredible feeling that does not fade. It's only 5 metres by 7 metres, but if I have learned anything over the years, it's that even if you only have a small amount of outside space, don't be put off by growing stuff, because this space is small and I grow quite a lot. I'm Leyla Kazim, and this is my little patch of paradise in southwest London. When my husband Matt and I moved in 13 years ago, don't think there was a single plant in the whole garden. What we did was we filled the pond, we laid some wildflower turf over that, and then we started to introduce borders, and then all these years later we have this absolutely beautiful space. This is my sunny border, and I've got about 15 edibles growing in here, a mixture of annuals and perennials, and I just love that it's absolutely crammed and there's something tasty growing in every single little patch of space. Being half Turkish Cypriot, I have a real affinity for figs, and I grow one here in a pot, and it's pretty old, and for years I didn't really get any ripe fruit, and then actually I picked up a great tip, which was bagging the fruit. And that's about putting a plastic bag around each developing fruit, which acts as a little greenhouse. And so the figs actually ripen within a sort of reasonable time. And I've already eaten a ripe fig this year. Because water does collect in the bags through condensation and probably rain. Just empty it out occasionally and put it back on. And then I'll reuse the same bags each year. I'm very lucky that I get to travel quite a lot, and I like to be influenced by my travels and to see if I can bring a little bit of a country I visited back into the garden. And one part of the world that does this a lot is South America. Of course, South America is known for its sweet potatoes, where the plant is originally from. There's a huge variety, and this year I thought I'm going to see if I can grow sweet potatoes at home, and so they are currently in the border, and you know what, they're actually doing okay. So here I've got the sweet potatoes and also New Zealand yam. The New Zealand yam and the sweet potatoes are actually planted in a mound of earth, and I do that because it makes the harvesting much easier rather than having to dig down. And I also cover the earth with black plastic, which I reuse each year, and that keeps the soil warm, which both these tubers want. And then I use upturned plastic bottles with the bottoms cut off, which directs the water straight to the roots and the tubers. From the looks of the top growth, I might actually get something come November, and that's about the time when I'll harvest. But before then, I won't really know. So hopefully it will be a good surprise come autumn. If you've ever been put off by the fact that you don't have access to loads of space, I would advise you to go with pots. It's a great place to start. The two I'm most proud of this year, and which I think are doing particularly well, is the corn and also the beans. I've got 4 or 5 pots of beans, dwarf beans. One of the things I love about growing veg in pots is that it's easier to protect them from pests. And I do this a number of ways, one of them being putting a strip of copper tape around the rim of the pot because slugs and snails don't like to cross copper. And I also use cloches over the young plants in the form of recycled plastic bottles or clear plastic bags. If I'm lucky enough to harvest some corn this year and some beans and it's looking promising, it's just going to be an incredible feeling, because how amazing to hold a corn cob in your hand and think, I've grown this, and then for it to make part of a delicious meal. It's kind of magic. The raspberries are year in, year out, the most productive and reliable crop in the entire garden. It's only about 7 canes, and it bestows upon me kilograms of raspberries a year. Last year I got 4 kilograms. And if I had one tip to any gardener with a little bit of outside space, it would be to grow raspberries, because they're so easy, and if they're happy, they'll do so well. To make them happy, give them a spot that isn't too sunny. And because mine are right next to the kitchen window, I also don't have a problem with birds. They're like the perfect crop. The smell of a bowl of freshly picked raspberries first thing in the morning, it is one of my favourite garden experiences by far. I think I might just have one now. Even though this is a kind of not huge garden, I really wanted a wildflower meadow, and I like to refer to this meadow as my postage stamp meadow, because it is a small meadow. So the great thing about the meadow is that the flowers in it varies throughout the year, and it starts with a wash of crocuses in early spring, which is great for the pollinators that are out and about early in the year. And then the flowers kind of change throughout the season. We've got things like oxeye daisies, meadow buttercups, common knapweed. I love when the taller flowers, like the wild carrots, are backlit by the sun. I've created a space that welcomes in so much nature that makes me feel great. It's like we're sharing and both enjoying the garden. The meadow is also one of the favourite dozing spots of the local fox. It has flattened some flowers, but I don't mind him being there. We have done so much with this small space, and it's completely unrecognisable to how it was when we first moved in 13 years ago. It went from a barren landscape of just paving to something now that is lush and green and full of wildlife. And it is honestly one of my favourite places to be in the whole world, because that's true.
Leyla is so right. It doesn't matter what you grow, where you grow it, how you grow it. the thrill and magic of sowing a seed, raising the plant, looking after it to maturity and ripeness, and then harvesting and eating never wears off. In fact, in my experience, it just gets better and better. Now, I have a small collection of succulents here, and they're very easy to grow from cuttings. What you need to do is choose a stem that's nice and straight. I've got a good one there. Now, with most cuttings, you pot them up, you spray them, you might put them in a bag, just to keep them alive until they form roots. But with succulents, you need to let them callus first. So actually, the important thing to do at this stage is nothing. Just leave them where they will be dry, like that, and the base where you cut will scar over, and it won't form roots until that scar is there, and that will take at least 2 weeks. But actually, I've got some that I did earlier. There's a good boy. Come on. I took these cuttings about 6 to 8 weeks ago. Normally, I would say wait until you see really positive signs of new growth or roots coming out the bottom of the pot. But for these, I think we can risk it. So what I'll do is tip them out very carefully. Well, we've certainly got some roots. What's interesting is that one there has got roots, good roots. That one there has got roots. That, not so much. But I can put that back in. So I'm going to put that to one side, because you can see, essentially, it's calloused over. It just hasn't yet formed roots. It's not the end of the road. So I've got 2 that I can pot up. Now, I've got some grit here, because I want to make the mix really, really free draining. So I'm just going to add it to my normal mix. So I've got a really good gritty one, like that. Pop it in. Now, rather than push this into the mix, obviously I've got fairly fragile roots in there, so we're going to pop that like that, get my mix, try not to break the roots, and go around it like that. Put some grit around it and water it once, and then you won't need to water that again for at least another month. You don't need to do more than that. The danger is always from overwatering, not underwatering.
Now, just over a year ago, Nick became a homeowner, and we followed his progress as he got to grips with his new garden.
After a year living in a rented cottage, I finally bitten the bullet and bought my own place. I'm just so thrilled to finally be able to put down roots, literally and metaphorically. I guess, like going to any new place, you need to take a little bit of time just to kind of settle yourself in, get to know the locals, get to know the spirit of the place. It's not a huge garden, but it's about average for the UK. And so I really wanted to pack in as much as I possibly could. So the terrace on this side will have effectively a sort of a fire pit in the wall, and then a little bit of a fire on the other side as well, which will be a nice sort of breakfast area. And then really the rest of this space that's currently sitting as lawn is going to be nearly entirely planted.
I'm happy to say I have plenty of plants to get me started. Most were in pots in my rented garden, so it was a case of getting them stored safely over winter and brought over here. There's all sorts of other bits and pieces here as well that have come from the rented cottage. Got this fantastic Anastodontia over here. All of them are going to be freed and starting to grow in the garden really soon. And I've got all sorts of new plants as well that I'm going to add into the mix. So various hellebores, some wonderful erysimum down here. This is a fantastic cultivar, quite a new one, called Poem Lavender. And it's got that lovely mix of kind of peachy pink with a mauve and a slight sort of purple note to it. And what's brilliant, of course, about these perennial wallflowers is they don't stop flowering for about 3 years and then drop dead. As long as you take cuttings, you can keep them going in the long term. Despite the weather being changeable, I've been really busy working in my new garden. And I'm excited to say that it's really beginning to feel like my garden. I'm really pleased with the structure in terms of the trees and the large shrubs I've got, and then there's certain species which I've repeated all the way through to give the planting a real sense of continuity. And so I've repeated several times over, a combination of Rosa Emma Hamilton with that kind of gorgeous peachy tone, along with Salvia Caradonna with its more purple-blue notes. The two look fantastic together, and they flower for a good 6 or 7 months, so that really helps. This wall is way older than the house, and it's absolutely full of cracks and crevices, so it means it's perfect for establishing little plants into. Now, if you're going to do this, ideally you'll have a southwest facing wall. That's of course where the predominant rain comes in, so it will irrigate anything. And the other thing you need to look for, ideally, is a piece of stone where it's actually tipping slightly back. In other words, as rain hits the surface, it will actually run into the wall and support the plant that you want to go for. Just going to put a bit of gritty soil in there as well to give the plant a really good chance to get its roots in and get well established. Now, I've noticed around the village several people have got this growing really successfully in walls. It's one of our native British sedums. It takes on fantastic colours in the autumn, or if it's a bit stressed out, and its natural habitat is kind of growing in a stony environment like this. It's got a fairly substantial root ball, which is obviously larger than the hole just here. But there's absolutely no reason why I can't squish this down. It's all I'm really losing there is water. That's nicely settled in now, and it should establish over the next few months. But there's loads of other planting opportunities in here, so I might squeeze in a few extra sedums, maybe a few house leeks as well. They're going to love this environment.
When I moved here just over a year ago, the garden was a blank canvas with little more than a lawn, a few trees, all framed by stone walls. But after months of hard work, I have finally managed to transform this space into what I hope will be my forever garden. And I have to say, I'm fairly pleased with the way it's starting to look. Gone for quite a tight colour theme through the garden, and I think it always helps to kind of bind a whole space together and really unify it. And so there's a whole load of limes that run through all of the planting, but I also use blues and these kind of purpley tones along with kind of oranges and peaches. I'm pretty pleased with the way they're all holding together. And there's been a few real stars this year. A particular favourite of mine is this salvia called Nachtvinder, and it's got that kind of deep, plummy, grapey tone to it. It's absolutely gorgeous. One of the other things I like to do to keep the garden looking really fulsome at this time of year is to have a few sneaky slot-in plants. In other words, things I've grown elsewhere but can just drop into the borders at the back end of the season. And this sedum, or Heliotelefium, is a good example of that. So this is an absolute cheat. It's just in its container, sitting in the border. It's incredibly drought tolerant, so it's very easy and happy kind of in this container. It meshes in. You can't see the pot at all, and it just gives that little extra bit of colour, elevation and structure for the rest of the season. Of course, plants are at their most thirsty in the middle of summer. Groundwater or tap water tends to be quite alkaline, tends to be quite limey. Certain plants, like brassicas, like that, but the bulk of plants prefer a slightly acidic water, and rainwater, of course, is always that. So I want to introduce a whole series of water butts down here to capture water from the top of the glass house and keep my plants happy. Now, what I've specifically gone for here is to allow a really good hangover, and that's absolutely key because of course you're going to want to be extracting water from your water butts and you want to easily be able to get a watering can underneath. Now, most water butts come with a couple of different converter kits with them. So often the downpipe on a house, you can get a converter that will take that into the drain pipe. And then for this particular one, I've got a converter which is just slotted in here at the moment, which takes directly from the glass house gutter. Now, the other two key components are the blocker for the far end of the gutter, and then this, which basically slots into the end here, and it's what the pipe will run into. And so just need to get the pipe up to the right length. Of course, it needs to sit higher than the outlet just here. And so I'm just going to use a pair of secateurs to cut this down to what I think is going to be about the right height. I think if we go in there, that's going to do the trick. And then this tube can come up into and connect to the converter. All of these converter systems are slightly different, but this one just works by clipping onto the frame of the glass house. It's as simple as that. And now comes the really hardcore technical bit of this process. What you've got to do is take this pipe, shove it onto there. Job done. Well, it's been quite a journey to get the garden to this point, from a piece of turf through to productive growing and lots of colour. And I'm really looking forward to the next stage of development, which is all about putting in my spring layer. So that'll be all the tulips that go in during autumn time. I'm only part way through the journey in creating this garden, but that's part of the process. It's always in an endless flux, and I think that is what makes gardening amazing.
Nick's garden's looking absolutely beautiful, wonderful. And that tip about placing plants in their pots in the border is an old one, but it's a good one. I don't do it enough here. When things are fading away a little bit, it just adds that extra volume and colour and zing and works beautifully.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. But I'll see you back here at Longmeadow next Friday for the new series of Gardener's World. That's Friday the 14th of March at 8 o'clock.
So until then, bye-bye.
Thank you.